All right, Brent Porcio, TopVelocity.net. I have a special guest today. It's Kellen McCrary. Am I saying it right, Kellen?
That's right, man. Yep, you got it.
And he was nice enough to get on the show and kind of share what he's doing at it's Sparta, Sparta Point. That's what y'all are called?
So our blog is Sparta Point.
Okay, that's Sparta Point.
Our company is Sparta Science.
Awesome. Y'all done some amazing stuff so far that's really kind of revolutionary with baseball. I think a lot of people have probably just seen the new article in Baseball America on what you guys are doing, and that's kind of what inspired me to reach out to you and do this. But I want to kind of get started, you telling a little bit more about yourself, how you got into Sparta, how you developed this, and we'll kind of go from there. So tell us a little bit.
Yeah. I was a college and football track athlete, and that's where I originally got bit by the strength bug. And I actually went to graduate school for exercise physiology and strength and conditioning. I did research in graduate school, and upon finishing, I was applying for jobs, and I was obsessed with the way that they executed programs based on evidence-based information and data. So I applied, and I came out, and I've been here for 2 years, and I've been loving it ever since. As far as the company goes, it first started in 2008 as a training facility, and a training facility only that was just collecting data, right? So the big goal was to continue to collect data over the course of time so that programs were, again, of course, objective and based on evidence rather than guesswork and rather than someone's philosophy, because that's what they did 20 years ago, right? So the training facility developed and eventually accumulated enough information to create software. And so what happened in 2012 was Dr. Phil Wagner, the founder of the company, partnered with Richard Heel, who is a software extraordinaire of Silicon Valley, and they developed Sparta Track, which is the software that we currently use. And really, what we've done ever since is continue the model that we've had of collecting evidence-based training and providing an alternative to athletes that helps use objective measures and information to promote potential increase in performance and decrease any type of risk for injury. So, that's the model that we've kind of gone with, and we're continuing to acquire partner sites and grow as a company. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think y'all are kind of ahead of the curve on that. I've seen that slowly starting to happen in all sports. I think there's a lot of sports, specifically baseball being one, that it's going to probably be slow to acclimate themselves to this because everything has kind of been based on ego and more just what we think is the better way, not really driven by data, specifically on the training aspects of it, even though there's a ton of data in the game, but we just typically didn't look at it as much into the training aspect. So I think that's revolutionary, and that's a lot of what we do as well, and I think that's exciting. And that's why I want to get in today with this interview, is kind of getting into more of how this is working for you guys. So I think the one thing that's just really been, I think that's got to the reason the article came out with Baseball America was you did this study. Was it you guys who did the study, but the study on UCL injuries and its correlations to vertical jump? Or can you elaborate on that?
Correct, yeah. So the way that we operate is we are a pseudo research facility. We always are collecting data. So we think that Sparta, where athletes train at headquarters, is a site where we collect data. And we also have partner sites that are consistently collecting data as well. So all that information is being developed, and it helps grow the field and grow information. So it helps that there are multiple people that are continuing to collect all that. So we did the research ourselves, and we looked at the higher someone is, right? This is simply put, the higher somebody is jumping, using momentum and joint laxity is going to increase their risk for UCL, right? So it's like the more power you're creating, let's say off the bump when you're throwing, right? And you have a very, very high level of mobility, the more at risk your UCL is going to be, right? Because you are not using strength to produce force, you're using momentum and laxity to produce force.
Great point.
It's funny, I saw a picture of picture. I forget his name. It was back in the 80s, and it was a great picture of what a guy should look like coming off the mound. And the ball was just about to be released out of his hand, and his elbow was so far in front of his wrist that I was like, he's a pitcher for a reason, and so I think that situation is, of course, going to come with risk for injury just because you're putting yourself, risky position as far as upper body extremities is concerned.
Right. So, that makes perfect sense. And joint laxity means you typically get to end of range very, very often. So, that's when bad things go wrong, is when you're at the end of your range and mobility. So if you have strength, you have the ability to probably decelerate and accelerate better through that range, correctly?
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. So was it a direct correlation? Is that what the study was? Like, you actually took injured guys who had injured their UCLs, and then you had actually looked. Could you tell how it was kind of done, and then you looked at the vertical jumps, and then you found a correlation that way?
Yeah. So, and we're going to get down, to the bare bones of how the movement signature works here in a little bit. But really, we found that drive, the variable that's associated with mobility in the movement signature, was consistently paired up and shown to be in relation to the UCL injury, right? So we not only talk about drive being high and being at risk for UCL, but if your drive is high and you're also jumping very high on the force plate, you are therefore at risk for UCL. So we take those two variables and we say, okay, this individual is jumping very high. They have high drive, right? We also have information that correlates UCL risk, or rather the UCL injury that occurred, with those two variables. So we say, okay, this group of people had UCL. They also had a very high vertical jump height and very high drive in relation to the other variables. And that's how we looked at it and created that information.
Okay, so you're basically, before we kind of break this down and simplify it for everyone, so how could we simply say that guys that typically jumped higher were more risk for UCL?
Guys that, if we were to title it something, we would say guys that jump higher with the use of high drive are at risk for UCL.
Okay, so you can actually still jump high with obviously these other parameters in the jump and be not at risk, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay, exactly. Well then let's talk about these other parameters. So I know you're mentioning your approach of that I've been learning about through you guys is this load, explode, and drive, and then how you guys can assess and measure that through your force plates, I assume. Can you kind of define what each one of those components represent and kind of maybe give us an example of an athlete that would represent that?
Yeah, for sure, yeah. So in this case, let's treat our athlete as a pitcher. So we have an athlete come in, and we have them get on the force plate. So we think the best way to describe a force plate to an agent, a parent, an athlete who is not abreast to exercise physiology is it looks at how you interact with gravity, right? You're an athlete. Every athlete interacts with gravity. There's some kind of relationship. And the only way that you are a good athlete is if you put a lot of force into the ground and you put it into the ground efficiently, right? So we say, now that we have an understanding of that, we're going to get you on the force plate and we're going to do our 6 counter movement jumps to determine how you interact with gravity, right? From that information, we have a force time curve that's created, right? And now, if I present a force time curve to somebody who doesn't understand exercise physiology and who's not a strength coach like yourself and I, they're going to be confused, right? So we've taken that information and 3 variables, load, explode, and drive. The first variable, load, is the movement downward. So in a counter movement jump, there has to be, of course, a movement downward, right? For a pitcher, we think it's his loading phase when he's on the mound. It's triple flexion is another way that you can describe it. Flexion of the ankle, knee, and hip, the loading phase, right? The explode variable is the pause between downward and upward movement, right? So it's amortization. I don't want to get over anybody's head, but it really looks at how well you're going to transfer the initial force that you created downward, upward.
Yeah,
right?
it's like
the isometric movement.
Exactly,
yeah.
Isometric movement.
And it's the bottom of the curve or the top of the curve, right?
It's the very top.
Okay, top of the curve.
It's the very top. And then the drive, of course, as you can guess, is the finishing movement, right?
Or triple extension.
Movement upward.
Or
exactly. It's the triple extension.
Right.
Exactly it. So we think the drive in a pitching motion is going to be, when you're lengthening out and you're extending and rotating, and it's right when the ball leaves your hand. And then also it's after the ball leaves your hand when you're decelerating your arm and actually showing good control. Because me and you both know a lot of injuries occur when someone isn't very fluid and doesn't time things very well, and they're almost jerky in how they finish movement. That puts them at a higher risk for injury just because they're not as quote-unquote coordinated and smooth. Does all that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So if we go back to the UCL study, how were those driving well but not loading or exploding well? That were more, because you said those who had high drives, had high vertical jumps, had more chance for UCL injury. Was that correct?
Correct.
So, but am I right in saying that they were not loading and exploding well, or were they?
So the way we found it, the way that actually works is you will have a higher load, right, and you'll have a lower explode, and then your drive supersedes both of those. So the reason why you're jumping high is not because of your load and explode, your first two variables. It's because your drive is super high and you're using momentum to whip yourself up there. Does that make sense?
Right, and those were the guys more prone to UCL injury.
Correct, exactly.
So what's the guy who's safer? So what's the goal? What's the standard here that we're trying to get to?
Right, so that's a great question. So we think a healthy signature in this pitcher should have all the variables above 45 and within 15, right? And, we always get the question, well, why 45, right? 45 is the average relative to our database. It's the T-score number that is an average. So from a medical standpoint, say when you went to the doctor when you're 7 years old and they pull up a BMI chart and they say, hey, this is where you are relative to the average, right? So you kind of know where you fall relative to your peers, right? When we're talking to an athlete, in this case a pitcher, we say, okay, for these three variables, this is where you fall relative to the average. If, for example, we have a pitcher who is 55, 50, 60, he's well above average in all of his variables, right? So therefore, he's healthy and that box is checked, right? He's above average athlete, fantastic, right? The other aspect is within 15, right? So if you have a variable that's super out of whack, right, and you're at, let's say, 50, 45, 70, much worse scenario because it's almost like you have too much of one thing. You want everything almost in moderation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'm looking at like that article about where you talk about it, and you're showing a little graph of these numbers. You got 10 to 90. So on that article, you're showing the load at 41, the explode at 45, and then the drive at 70. Would that be the ones that are more vulnerable to UCL injury?
Correct, because that drive is so high. Even if the load is higher than the explode, if the drive is the dominant variable, that's where the issue comes in.
So you're really trying to balance them all out? That's the goal?
Correct. Now, The thing is, we want to balance them out, but we also want a sports-specific signature. So, for example, we want a pitcher to have load be 55, explode be 50, and then drive be 55. He's rotational. That's what's known as a rotational scan. His torso, right, isn't super tight, and so he's actually able to extend and rotate rather than myself, who has higher explode, who's too stiff, wouldn't be a very good pitcher because I don't have the ability to relax and actually transition my force correctly, right? So we think that a signature not only should be above 45 and even, but somewhat sports-specific relative to what that athlete needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's an interesting way to look at it because now you're bringing in the rotational aspects of it. So you're saying, in a way, you want to build in more rotational energy into that equation, and that helps build it, kind of even it out. Is that what you're saying? Maybe.
Exactly it. Yeah, we're on the same page, man. Again, it's like I myself, wasn't a baseball athlete in college, but I do know that angular velocity and rotation is going to play a huge role in how effective an athlete performs, especially if they're a pitcher. So we've seen that, and we always get the question, well, how do you know a pitcher should have this? How do you know? based on the trends that we've seen, we don't have any specific data showing that a pitcher should have a rotational scan, but the highest level pitchers that we've had over the course of 8 years here have had rotational scans. Any good rotational athlete, conceptually, should be able to relax through their torso and transition force in a rotational manner.
Right, but at the same time, too, I mean, in my research, I found that if we go too rotational, then we also go back to injury, too. I feel like there's a moderation, right?
Exactly, man. That's exactly it. It's almost like, in the same kind of camp as a guy that says, "Oh, I need to do a lot of core work. I need to do a lot of core work." It's the opposite. Like a basketball guy who has super high explode, it's like, dude, like you don't need to do more core work. You're at risk for a soft tissue injury because you're so immobile. You need to be taking that 20 minutes a day, and instead of doing planks, be rolling out and activating and stretching. So no, that's it. It's exactly it, man. You can't have too much of one thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I call it. I mean, pitching's a multiplanar movement. We have the corneal movement initially, the lateral movement, the transverse movement, when the hips rotate, the shoulders rotate, and then the sagittal movement when the trunk goes forward. So we need to train in all planes. And you're right, we can't just overemphasize one plane. And if we're going to be healthier, we have to equally use all planes and generate energy and rotationally, linearly, laterally, and that's going to ultimately distribute the loads better as opposed to just overemphasizing one movement, right?
Exactly. No, that's exactly it, man. I 100% agree. And as you've seen, there's injuries associated with trying to do too much of that one thing. So
yeah, you get guys. The front leg has a high correlation to pitching velocity, and you get guys who want to overemphasize front leg extension, then they start hyperextending, and then they start having knee problems. You're right. You've got to even this all out. I think that's brilliant. And I think what makes you guys revolutionary is that you're addressing it from the force and the ground. That's the potential energy. And I think what we're looking at, and it's brilliant with you guys, is that if you don't understand potential energy, then you're going to wind up overcompensating with kinetic energy.
Right.
And if we can more efficiently get the potential energy into the chain and then efficiently transfer it, that's where it starts. All sports should start from the ground. That's where we're on the same page.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
And unfortunately in baseball, they just haven't addressed this well enough. Do you find that the challenges with baseball players that come to your facility, do they have a hard time embracing, specifically pitchers, I think they have more, do they have a hard time taking this kind of ground force approach with you guys? Is it a hard sell for you?
Yeah, we've had, athletes come in and, whether they're high school, college, or pro, and say, well, coach, I'm a rotational athlete. I never jump. I'm never doing stuff on the force plate. And so our response is exactly what you just said. Look, the more force you put into the ground, the better rotation you're going to have, the higher you're going to jump, the faster you're going to run, the better you're going to decelerate. It's an indication of strength, right? What better way to indicate your strength and your athleticism than to measure how well you interact with gravity, right? You have to produce force to push off the block and then decelerate on the front side, all the while humming the ball in at 95 miles per hour. There's a level of strength involved with that, and this helps measure and determine.
Yeah,
that's kind of like the biggest selling point. Yeah,
right. And it's the same thing. I'm sure you sell in mobility too. You say you got to be mobile, you got to be strong, you got to be quick, you got to use the correct movements, and you got to time it all perfectly well. To me, I say that the high velocity pitcher is the best athlete in the world because we have the fastest human movement ever recorded, our internal rotation speed. So if Chapman's the best athlete in the world, then we've got to train like the best athlete in the world, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I agree.
So when you assess them this way, how does your programming work? So you program. It seems like you're very organic in your programming. How does that work?
Yeah. So the way that we do it is our staff, over the course of a year, will sit down and literally compile almost 30 hours of how to effectively train these athletes based on their assessment. So every year we choose to reevaluate the program and look at information and trends that have helped improve each one of the variables. And for the past, I want to say, we've looked at probably since we came into play in 2008, we've had the three mainstays, the three major movements be able to improve the three variables. And there's one movement associated with each variable, right? So for the load variable, we think front squat is going to help improve that the most, right? So that's based on the trends that we've seen and based on data that we're currently running to show, hey, this load variable was improved based on this treatment of squat for these athletes. Right?
Awesome.
The second one, explode, is improved by deadlift. And the third one is split squat, rear elevated split squat, or, since we have 1,000 names in the field of strength conditioning, Bulgarian split squat, one leg squat, whatever you choose to call it. Our goal is to load the front side leg and target the posterior chain. Whereas explode, we're looking to target the trunk. And with load, with front squat, we're looking to target the anterior chain or ankle to turn on the quad, that type of thing. So,
what do you do for more CNS activity? Is there any like speed and agility stuff? Any Olympic cleans or anything like that?
Yeah, so we actually have in our program reevaluation this past year, we had cleans to improve explode, just from the rate of force development standpoint and neural stimulation standpoint. And then also we do a lot of linear and lateral speed work with athletes that need it. A pitcher, going back to the pitcher case study, he's not going to be doing any linear or lateral speed work because he's not going to be running. He needs to work more angular velocity, more extension. So we have him away from that stuff. But if we have a defensive back who is one of our NFL prospects training for his combine or pro day, we're going to be doing, the lateral and linear speed work that he needs, which is going to fire up his nervous system. And me and you both know you can only sprint about 10 times at 100% velocity and still have a nervous system. So after that you hit a wall.
Right.
So
cool. And it's each day they come in. You're programming specific for that day and how they're assessing, or is this like a weekly assessment?
Right. So we assess on a 3-week period, and so the way it works is an athlete will come in if it's their first day. We do an assessment on the force plate, and then we'll give them the 3 weeks of programming, and then we'll reevaluate at the end of that 3-week period. So it helps because a lot of tests, not to name names or knock any tests out there, are done twice a year. And so it's like, from a sensitivity standpoint, how do you know it's helping them get better? How do you know it's helping them improve athleticism? So for us, we want high levels of sensitivity, so we're frequently testing to make sure that it's actually working and that our treatments are effective.
That's huge. That's really awesome. So I guess that's where the software comes in. I mean, talk a little bit about the Sparta track, what it does, and how it helps coaches.
Yeah, so the way it works is, we have the hardware side, which is the force plate, and then we have the software side, which looks at taking that information and then putting it into the 3 bars, load, explode, and drive, obviously, that make it more legible and easier for coaches, ATCs, orthopedics, even GMs to look at and say, hey, I understand what's going on here, right? Because they look at a force time curve, they're like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, what do I do with
this? So, we want to make it easily deciphered. So that's one major piece of the software that helps, communicate information. Then we also have the programming side, which, you can put in any exercise that you want to help improve load, explode, and drive and improve athleticism if you're a strength coach. We have our own set of exercises. We have a philosophy that's associated with our training, but every strength coach has the ability to decide what they want to use to improve the variables. By no means do we make it a requirement that if they get with our program, they have to use our stuff. By no means. We want everyone to have freedom, right? And that's one big thing that, people have loved in the technology. It's like, hey, maybe you want to try split squat to improve drive, but I'm going to try overhead squat. Fantastic. Let's reevaluate in a year and see what was more effective. So that's the fun part, is you still get to be the scientist in your own lab.
That's really cool.
What it is.
So what do you offer? Yeah, what do y'all offer to coaches? Like, what can coaches buy from you guys to have access to this, or is that something they can?
Yeah, so the way it works is we sell the hardware and the software, and we sell the hardware, obviously the force plate, and then we also sell the software. And there's a dollar amount per user, and it's relative to how many users you have in your system. So
that's awesome. So how many? I mean, what kind of coaches are buying your stuff? I mean, where are you more popular in the professional levels, or what level are you most marketed in? I guess.
Yeah. So the level that we're most popular in is going to be professional. Right now, if I was to rattle off a few, we are in the NFL with 3 teams. We have 2 MLB teams. We have several rugby teams overseas. We work with an MLS team. We work with several colleges across the nation in high school, colleges at basketball level, baseball, Olympic sports. We have college level football teams. We have right now right around 35 partners, and we're going to be, I want to say, in the next 3 weeks acquiring 4 more.
That's
so
great.
growth rate is almost exponential, which is exciting.
So it's working.
Yeah, exactly.
It's working.
That's exactly it, man. You got to know that's working. So
exactly.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, and our goal is just to continue to help the field and help validate what works in training an athlete.
Awesome. You got any questions for him?
Oh yeah, I just saw in one of your guys' recent videos where you were doing tests of like balancing on one leg on the force plates and then balancing on one arm, and I saw with the arm, I was wondering if you guys do anything with that for pitchers for like joint stability in the arm, and if you were seeing any correlation to that leading to injury, if they're maybe unstable in the shoulder or the arm or something like that.
Yeah, so with the upper body sway, you said it perfect. It looks at upper body joint stability. So, if someone is, like we talked about, too loose, they're going to be at a risk for certain injuries. If someone is too stable, like myself, who's training to not be a pitcher, I'm going to be a meathead that's too stable in my upper body.
Not elastic enough, yeah.
Right, exactly. So it's like you're going to be at risk for certain injuries on that end of the spectrum. Right now, we don't have data showing that upper body sway is related to certain injuries, but we're hoping in the next year or so that we do have that, and we can release that to our partner sites, and so they can use it to help minimize any risk for injuries that their athletes have.
Very nice. And then just the other one, just kind of simplifying it for people who might be watching. When you guys were talking about the load and drive, and then load, explode, and drive. To me, it was kind of sounding like guys with like really natural efficiency, like baseball guys who have really high vertical jumps or something like that, and then they're not using enough strength and power. Is that kind of what you guys were getting at? Like that's why you go into the strength training to build more strength and power rather than just natural efficiency to be able to jump high and stuff like that.
Correct. It's exactly it. The way that I describe it is you don't have a big engine, is what it is. You're not very strong. You just use momentum and your length to produce force rather than actual recruitment of motor units and strength. So when I explain that to a 15-year-old pitching athlete who's a prospect and hums them in at 90 miles per hour, I say, look, dude, like, and I mean that's one thing that has helped a lot of coaches understand, like, you're using a lot. Get your kid stronger and get minimal risk for injury.
Nice.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate this. So where would you send them? Just SpartaPoint.com is to learn more about you guys?
I would send them to SpartaScience.com.
Okay.
So with Sparta Science, when you pull up the website, there's going to be ways you can kind of explore. There's going to be the Performance Center, which what we do is here, and then we'll help anybody get in contact with one of the coaches to figure out how to train here if they're in the Bay Area or if they want to fly out and train with us, because we offer remote training. We also have the software side, which talks about the bulk of what we can offer as far as with a high school program, and then we have the blog, which is just the stuff that we've been currently doing and the trends that are going on in the field currently.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate this, Kellen. I'm going to end the interview right now.